All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Surprised you're here. Nobody uses JavaScript. Come on. Just as a sort of a full disclosure, this is an intro talk. So if you're a Vue expert or you've been using Vue for any amount of time, you might want to consider going to one of the other excellent talks. It won't be as entertaining or as filled with glowing personality as this talk will, but you might actually learn something in one of those talks. So let's do this. This session is Vue, the next big thing in JavaScript. And my clicker's working great. My name is BURKE HOLLAND. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. Anybody here ever been to Tennessee before? No, that's probably a couple people. Yeah, you guys don't count here. Yeah. Only for my international travelers here. You should come to Nashville. We would love to have you, especially if you like country music. Anybody here like country music? No? A couple people, this guy right here is brave. You're brave. That's all right. Listen, a lot of people like country music. I just don't happen to be one of them, even though I do live in Nashville. A good friend of mine, his name is David Neal, and let me zoom in on this here, drew this picture. If I can zoom in, there we go. And I always like to show this because he does a lot of good work. He's a developer, and he's also an artist. And he makes these wonderful cartoons every day on Twitter. So you should follow him on Twitter if you like tech and you like these cartoons. He's a wonderful artist, a wonderful guy. Actually, first, just so we can prioritize, follow me first, and then follow him second, right? So make sure you do it in that order. So we want to make sure that we get my follow out of the way here. So this is a wonderful likeness of me that he drew. I did get in Saturday. We got in Saturday noon, so I'm still recovering from a bit of jet lag, and I haven't quite figured out yet that drinking lots of alcohol in the evenings apparently does not help jet lag. I keep telling myself I'm going to go to bed early and drink water, but that has not happened yet, and probably won't happen today either. I work on the Azure team at Microsoft, and my job is essentially to look at all of the different JavaScript frameworks that people are using, talk to JavaScript developers, even if you're not using a framework, if you're just using plain JavaScript, but to work on the experience for JavaScript developers in Azure. So I meet a lot of people, and I actually met someone at a conference recently, and they said, they were saying they were using DigitalOcean, and I asked them if they had considered Azure, and they were like, oh no, that's for .NET. I was like, oh, yeah, see, that's the problem. So my job is to sort of help people understand what JavaScript can do inside of Azure and that it is a first-class citizen. So that being the case, I spend a lot of time working on docs. So I show you this URL to say that I'd love for you to check out the docs on Azure. When you spend a lot of time on something, you want everyone to know about it. So if you're interested in what JavaScript can do in Azure, that would be great. Okay. Also, shameless plug, I also did a video series recently, and since I have a mic and I can do this, it's a free video series for learning React, which this is a Vue session. I know this is getting confusing already, but you can learn how to build an application with React in a database called Cosmos DB, so you can check that out as well. Okay, so not to talk about me again, but let's talk about me again. David Neal drew this picture, and when he started drawing these pictures, I became very inspired by this idea of this guy's creating this amazing art, and he's doing it with an iPad. And I have an iPad, and I also have an iPad pencil, and so I also wanted to create some art. Unfortunately, I am a terrible, terrible artist. Some people are very good at drawing. I am not. Unfortunately for you, that makes no difference to me at all. I do not care. So I went ahead and drew some of my slides anyway. And when I was coming up with this presentation, I thought of you, of all of you. I thought about you. And so I drew you as I was thinking about you. So this is you as you were in my mind. You have a lot of teeth up top, not very many down bottom. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe you just have an odd smile. Anyway, this is you. Or maybe you have long hair. Perhaps you have glasses. Again, I didn't have all of this information when I was creating this presentation. I can't possibly draw everyone in this room, okay? But no matter what you look like, right, you may feel kind of like this. The last thing in JavaScript was like 20 minutes ago. This is super irritating that I have to come to yet another session about another JavaScript framework. Please make it stop. I think a lot of us feel this way, and it's okay to feel that way. I want to validate that feeling for you. Unfortunately, I also want to tell you that 20 minutes is an eternity in JavaScript. I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry. By the time this presentation is over, there's going to be a new framework that everyone is using, and you're the only one that isn't using it and doesn't know about it yet. I wish that wasn't the world that we lived in, but it is. So here we are learning about yet another JavaScript framework and the next big thing in JavaScript. And in fact, I think we could probably retitle this presentation to Vue.js 20 minutes is an eternity in JavaScript will be the alternate title for this presentation today. So JavaScript has a fundamental problem, and we need to talk about that first. But before we define what that is, I would like to tell you a little story this morning. I recently purchased a house. It's not a new house, it's an older house. And it was a foreclosure. And a foreclosure, for those who aren't familiar, is when you don't pay your mortgage, eventually they will come and ask you to kindly move out. So you must leave the house. Basically, you get kicked out and evicted. So the house that I bought was a foreclosure. And what people do in the US is they buy foreclosures, and then they fix them up, and then they sell them much higher. So they can buy a house at an auction. Say, they may buy, say they buy it really low, they fix it up on the inside, and then they try to sell it really high, and that's called flipping. And this is a phenomenon in the United States. In fact, there's television shows, hours and hours and hours of TV about how this is done, and everybody thinks that they can flip houses. It doesn't work. Everyone loses money, including in this case. But this is my dishwasher. So when they renovated the house, they put in all new appliances in the kitchen. Stainless steel. They're beautiful, they're all the same brand, right? Everything is cohesive, looks great, looks like a nice dishwasher. It is not. This is the bottom of the barrel dishwasher. This is the cheapest dishwasher that money can buy. And it has a huge problem. It smells really, really, really bad. It is really hard for me to convey to you with words how bad this dishwasher smells. I took this picture here. This is a dramatic recreation, but you can see it's nice and dirty inside. I thought this was you could get a good sort of feel for what I'm going for here. But it was really bad. This is my 11-year-old, one of my 11-year-olds, and people would just refuse to even go in the kitchen. And this is a serious problem because we spend a lot of our lives in the kitchen of our homes. Sort of gathering place, but like even the dog won't come in the room, right? The kids won't do anything. They're not going to come in the room. You can't, as long as the dishwasher stays shut, it's fine. The second you open it, I mean, it's just like getting punched right in the face with sewage. I mean, it's nasty. So this is what my 11-year-old looks like when being asked to do the dishes. Coincidentally, this is what he looks like when you ask him to do anything at all. So if anyone has any parenting advice to help me with this, please come see me afterward. I would definitely appreciate that. So my first instinct was to take this dishwasher apart. And actually, that's not true. My very first instinct was to call someone who could fix the dishwasher for me. And he showed up, did a bunch of stuff, told me a bunch of things, charged me $350, left, and my dishwasher still smelled like garbage. So then I took it upon myself to fix this thing. So I took this dishwasher apart. Again, this is not what it looked like. This is a dramatic recreation. But I took this thing out, and I took it apart. I took it all the way down to the screws. There are a lot of screws in a dishwasher, and they are all different sizes, and there are still some, after I put it back together, that I have laying around. I don't know where they go. I'm a little bit worried that I have more screws when I started than when I finished than I did when I started. But anyway, I took the whole thing apart, and this is what I found when I took this dishwasher apart. That's what I found. Nothing. Just a bunch of dishwasher parts. How can something that doesn't have anything in it smell so bad? This makes no sense. And so I became very distraught, and I told my wife, I'm going to Home Depot, which is the local home improvement store. And she's like, for what? And I'm like, I don't know. I need parts. I don't know what parts I need. I'm going to the hardware store. So I go to the hardware store, I'm standing in the aisle, the plumbing aisle, looking at the parts, and I'm just beside myself. I don't know what I'm going to do. I think we're going to have to move, possibly, even to a different state to escape this smell. This is a bad scene. And this older gentleman walks up to me who works at Home Depot, which is really weird because you can never find anyone to help you in a Home Depot. But on that specific day, he walks up and he says, what's going on in sort of this fatherly manner. Bizarrely and weirdly puts his arm around my shoulder, and I explained what was happening, and then he told me how to fix it. So I'm about to tell you what he told me. The dishwasher works like this. This is underneath my sink. Food and water comes in from the top, okay? And And so waste drains from the sink into this thing called a disposal. And it's kind of hard to see because of the colors. It's right there in the middle. The dishwasher drains. So the dishwasher's on the side. You can't see it. It's over here. I got a laser, so I'm going to use it. It's right there. You can't see the laser either. Anyway, it's on the left. And the water from the dishwasher comes back through this hose here, and it flows back, and it comes around, and into the disposal here. Now, you would think that in the disposal there's some sort of two-way valve, right? Because all of the water drains out this pipe to go to the sewer, but it's all coming into the same spot and then draining out from the bottom. So waste drains into the sewer from here. Now, here's what happens. Stuff, water, pears, shrimp, apparently poop, I don't know who's putting poop in the sink, is coming down the sink, and it goes back out the dishwasher hose because there's nothing to stop it from doing that. There's no valve there. It's just wide open. And it gets stuck right here at the bottom. It just sits there. And the smell comes back out the hose, goes through the hose, and it comes back out the dishwasher and into my face. This is very weird to me because you would think it would go out the sink, but it doesn't. It goes out the hose. So how do we fix this problem? The fix is so simple that it's just so painful. We raise the hose. This is all you have to do. And in fact, if you look at the installation manual for any dishwasher, the first thing it will tell you is you need to raise the hose. And what this does is it stops the ability of the garbage from the sink to backflow into that hose and sit there and rot. I tell you this long-winded and elaborate story to say this. JavaScript has a big problem. What is the problem with JavaScript? It's JavaScript. JavaScript's own problem is itself, right? The lack of, up until recently, a proper module system, the lack of different features being available and ready in different browsers. And so we begin to fix this by creating very complex solutions to the problem. We need things like minification. We need things like bundling. We need application frameworks. And we've created some very, very complex engineering solutions to this problem. And one of the things that's become difficult for us as JavaScript developers is that every time we're asked to learn a new one of these things, we start to get a little queasy. Because it's not like jQuery anymore. Those days are over, right? Now it's like learning an entirely different platform in a new language. So why do we need another JS framework? Because Vue doesn't require you to learn something complex to use it. This is the beautiful thing about Vue. Vue essentially just says, raise the hose. That's the solution. My colleague, Sarah Drasner, likes to say that Vue is very much like an iPhone. It's a very complex piece of engineering, but the interface is so simple and so easy to use that it's so much fun to work with. And I would completely agree with that description. So if you've gotten to the point in your life where you're like, I used to enjoy JavaScript development, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. Vue just might be for you. You might really, really like it. So that's one of the important things, and that's one of the reasons why it's interesting to look at. I want to give you 3 reasons today that you should seriously consider Vue, not for your next project, but just consider learning it and looking at it. Those reasons are, number 1, it's simple. Vue is dead simple. Almost the way that JavaScript development used to be back in the day when we could just drop a script tag on a page and just get started. It is powerful. One of the things that simplicity usually suffers from is if something's simple and easy to be used, that's great, but it often is not extendable and it's not complex enough, right? So we're always making a trade-off between complexity and simplicity. We want it to be easy to use, but we want it to be extendable. Vue is incredibly powerful, and we'll look at that as well. And then lastly, Vue is popular. Now, I know that we sort of have this knee-jerk reaction to popular, like, look, I don't want to use something just because it's popular. I'm not saying that is the reason to use it, but I am saying that is a reason to consider it, and we'll look at why that's extremely important. So we're going to look at all these things today. We're going to look at a lot of different code samples, and we're going to walk through sort of an introduction to Vue. And then when we're done, I'm going to give you a resource where you can go and learn Vue on your own pace for free, okay? So that's what you get at the end of this presentation. If I pique your interest in Vue, you'll be able to go learn it on your own time at no cost to you. Cool stuff. All right. So let's get started. First, let's talk about simple. I want to go through simple and sort of show you exactly what I mean here. This is our first example. And I'll open this in a separate window so we can have some larger. In fact, we don't really need to. But in this case, this is my first demo. This is how you include Vue. That's it. That's the demo right there. Now, if you've used some of the most recent JavaScript frameworks, this is really impressive because you can't do this anymore. You can't just drop a script tag on a page and get started. Like those days, we thought those days were over. And in fact, a lot of people like that or me are older will sit around and pine about, oh, I remember in the old days, we could just put a script tag on a page and write some JavaScript back in my day. Walk 4 miles on my hands and knees to school. And I think that for a lot of people that are coming into JavaScript, it used to be very accessible, and it's not that accessible anymore, right? Now you need to know Webpack, and you need to know about transpilers, and you need to understand bundling, and you need to understand splitting, and you need to understand optimization. I mean, it's really complex, and web development, at the heart of web development, the thing that was attractive was that it was so simple. And so this is sort of a throwback there. I really, really like this. This is probably the best demo in the whole deck here. Don't act like you're not impressed. Okay, so that's how we get started with Vue if we want to use Vue. The other thing I want to show you real quick, I'm going to show you a couple of different tricks in this presentation. This URL right here, to this unpkg.com, this is a site called Unpackage. And if you go to, let's see, unpkg.com, no, what was it? Let's see here. Yeah, so we can do, let's see, unpkg. I bet they don't have a alias set up. Surely enough. So what this does is unpack it. This is called Unpackage. This is from, what's his name? Michael. The name escapes me. I'm sorry, Michael, whatever your name is, for recording this on video. Anyway, a gentleman named Michael with unknown last name created this site, and this is a really, really cool. It turns anything on NPM into a CDN. So we could come here and we could say, up at the top, we can reference something like Vue. We can do this. And this will actually go out to NPM, find the Vue JavaScript file, and just turn it into a CDN, and we can use it. And this will work for anything on NPM. So you could use something like a CSS framework like Bulma. Now, everybody probably just went, what the heck is Bulma? It's a CSS framework. I'm going to show it to you. That's something else you get for free here. That's no extra charge. But I want to show you how that works as well. So I know that on NPM, there's a package called Bulma. And then inside of that, there's a CSS folder. And then inside of that, there's a file called bulma.css. And boom, I can get it back just like that. So Unpackage is a really cool resource, especially for prototyping. I don't know that you would necessarily want to use this in production, right? But it's definitely really cool for getting quick access to files. Okay, great. So let's move on here, talking about simple. The other thing that I really like about Vue, oh, I kicked all the waters over. I'm sorry. The other thing that I really like about Vue is that there's virtually zero boilerplate. So this is another very, very quick example here. But you can see that we are including the script tag, and then down here we open a script tag in the body at the end, and we just say a new Vue object, and then we select the element on which we want to apply Vue to this page. Vue doesn't want to be applied to the whole page. That's not very efficient. So it wants you to give it an element. In this case, we have a section here. If I zoom in, you can see the ID is app. So we're basically saying, hey, Vue, take everything that's inside this app tag, and turn it into the Vue application. This reminds me a lot of jQuery. Remember these days? I don't even know if this syntax is right anymore. This is how sad this is. But usually, used to be you could just open up a document ready tag and you could start coding, and that was all you had to do. That was it. And that was one of the beautiful things about web development. So this kind of reminds me of that. This idea of I can drop a script tag on my page, I can open a script tag, and I can just start coding. And I think that's a beautiful thing. All right, so virtually zero boilerplate, very easy to get started. It has a very, very small API. These are the Vue Getting Started page. This is the Vue Getting Started page from the Vue docs. This page has virtually everything that you need to know about Vue. Not the entire API, but all of the main concepts. And it teaches you things like binding, looping, conditionals, components, styling, so much more. This whole page is 1,400 words, including code samples. Your average lame technical blog post is 2,000 words, right? So this is not even as long as your average blog post, and you can learn most of the essential things about Vue just from reading this blog post. It's that simple. That's crazy and really, really nice. It's going to, let me move my arrow out of the way here. It's very familiar, and it's going to feel a lot like Angular. And that is because it borrows from both Angular and from React, and I feel like from even from Backbone in a lot of ways. How many people in here are doing Angular development currently? What about React? Okay, Backbone? Back there, all right, what guy? Knockout? jQuery, who's still using jQuery? Yeah, jQuery's still all right. Most of the web's still using jQuery. You're good to go. I do feel like we've been told, though, like it's not okay to use jQuery anymore. Like if you're not using one of these other frameworks, you know, how dare you? Which is just silliness. That's absolute silliness. So if you've used Angular or React before, this is going to feel familiar. If you've used Angular, it's going to feel really, really familiar. And someone told me that the person who wrote Vue, Evan, used to work on the Angular team. I don't know if that's true or not. I know that he used to work at Google, but it definitely borrows a lot from Angular. So let's take a look at the binding syntax for Vue. In this example here, we have, let's look at the code sample down at the bottom here. And actually, I'm going to open this in a different tab so we can get some better highlighting on CodePen. Perfect. Oh, that's better. OK. So here we have our application. This is the same Vue object that we had before. And you can see we're selecting the app for the element. That looks like Backbone. If you've done Backbone before, that'll look very familiar. You specify an element. And then right here, we have this data object. And the data object is where all of your data goes. So anything that you want to bind to in the UI or vice versa goes in the data object. If you've used Angular before, this is like your controller. Anything that you would put on the scope, you could reference in the page. Same thing. And then down here at the bottom, we have methods. And this is where all of your methods go. So I hope you can start to see already that Vue is very sort of, it's intuitive, right? You can almost figure this out for yourself if you had to guess. And the great thing about Vue is that it instills a lot of confidence because as you go on, you think to yourself, well, I could have guessed what that was. That's exactly what I thought it would be. And so how does this work? If we go back up to our markup here, we're going to look at a couple new things. So at the top here, we have a template syntax. So this is how you basically just shell out information from the data object to your page. So if you just want to write object to the page in a one-way binding format, this is how you do that. It's the double curly bracket. This is anything that you probably haven't seen before if you've worked with templating in JavaScript. And so that right there gives you, if we zoom out again, that gives you this handlebars for templates up top. That's coming from the bottom, right? And if I were to change that, hopefully it will update. Yeah, it updates there at the top. A little bit slow, but here we go. We're good. OK, so that's how we sort of do basic templating. Sounds like somebody's killing a cat out there. What the heck is that? Jeez. All right. So let's see. The other thing that I want to talk about is sort of the two-way binding, so what we'll call model binding. So you can see here on this input, we have a v-model. This is very similar to Angular, right? Angular has ng model. This is v model. You're starting to see the similarities here. And so this is your two-way binding. This is basically I have an input, and I want to specify the data that the input is bound to so that if it changes on the model or if the input changes, the single source of truth stays exactly the same. So we look at this. We have the input binding down here, and I just called it input binding. I could have called it anything I want. And then up here, it's actually being bound. So for instance, if I was to change this up here, this template syntax, if I was to put in input binding right here, then both of these will now say input binding because they're both bound to the same thing. And if I was to come up here and change this here in the model, then it'll change it up top. Right? So this demo is a lot like Angular does. The same sort of concept. You can have a one-way binding, or you can have this two-way binding with the model syntax here. And then for the events here, on the button, I've got this v-on and then click, which is the event. And then I just said event binding. Again, I could have called these anything I want. I could have called this click me, right? And if I change that here, and I change it up here, let it update. There we go. And then you can see over here in the console, there's the event. Now, one of the things that's really cool about events is that you can also pass in, because sometimes you need a reference to the element that actually sent down the event. In fact, you need that quite a lot. Go check on that cat. Sasha, make sure it's all right. All right, I'm worried. OK, so let's see here. I'm going to pass an event. And to do that, we just pass $event. That's all we have to do. And then down here in our method here, we can just say this, e. And then let's just console log. And we'll say e.target. Let it update here. Come on, CodePen, you ready to go? There we go. Right, now we're getting the button here. So it's very, very simple to create bindings both for inputs, both for one way and also for your methods as well, and very simple to get references to the elements that initiated those actions inside of your Vue model. So this is very straightforward, and in fact, you already have enough information to do a lot with Vue, just from what you've seen here, because we've already been through binding. And then we're going to go through some different things that I would consider what we call like essentials for basic understanding of something and being able to use it. All right, so that's our binding syntax. Let's look at looping syntax. The looping syntax looks like this. Let me just zoom in on this because I think this is good enough here. But you can see here we have a V-4. You can see album and albums. And then underneath that, we have a bit of markup that we want to repeat for each one of these albums. And so we're going to repeat this article, and inside of that, we've got some of this. There's a method here that I've added. I'm binding to this album artwork. I'm binding to the album collection name. And there's a couple different things that are happening here that have changed that I want to point out. So the first one is the V4 album and albums. If we go down and look at this code, all this code is doing, and I need to zoom out here, is making a fetch request down here. So whenever the component is created, there's a created method. The created method happens when the component is created. I'm doing a fetch. I'm using a fetch JSON-P because this just happens to be a JSON-P URL. Fetch is an API for making AJAX calls. Not available in all browsers. You can use something like Axios to get you cross-browser compatibility. But fetch returns a promise, and that promise contains the result, and then you have to turn that into JSON, and then you have to call another promise, and then you can actually do something with it. And in my case, I'm sort of filtering out the wrong types of data here, and I'm sticking that inside of this .albums. And this .albums is just an array on the data object. So anything that's on data, we can reference with this .whatever. So we've gotten our collection of albums back from the API, then we just take them and shove them into the albums array, and that's all we have to do. The rest happens with the binding and the markup. So if we come up here and we look at this, we're coming over, looping over the albums, and if we come down here, we have a click event. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that we have this new syntax. So one of the things that we were doing before was we were saying V-on click. But a lot of people don't want to type V-on, and so there's a shortcut syntax for that, and that's the @ sign. So if you use the @ sign and then click, that's the same as saying V-on click. The same thing down here with this source right here. See this colon source? This is the same thing as V-bind. So we had V-model. There's also a V-bind where we can bind things in. And the shortcut for that, the syntax sugar for that, is this colon here. So this is what it looks like to actually loop over something like a collection in Vue. The other thing I want to show you here that I think is kind of neat, I'm going to open this up in another tab. Let's scroll out. Let's do a new tab here. All right, so we have our collection, and inside of the collection, I have this click method here. And down in the method, I've got a method where I'm just doing show album info. One of the things that I find to be endlessly obnoxious about JavaScript frameworks is when it's difficult to get the item associated with any chunk of markup. So what I mean by that is what we usually do is we have a collection or some sort of item, and we bind that to the markup, and then the markup then represents that item visually. So in our case, we have a bunch of albums over here. So each album is each chunk of markup representing an album actually is an album. And there's a lot of data that goes along with that. And usually we want to do something with that. When we click a button, we don't want to work with the markup. We want to work with the underlying data. And what's really annoying to me is that sometimes it's very hard to get that reference. A lot of times what we have is we'll get an ID back, then we have to go back and reference the collection to find the item. But with Vue, you can just get this, and it's very, very easy to get that. So basically up here, you can see me doing the show album, and then I'm basically passing in right here the element, or we talked about the event here, and then an album. So down here at the bottom, I'm passing an album, and actually, this element isn't doing anything. So let's pull that out. This is some old dead code. So we're just going to pass an album, and then I'm just going to stringify the album out to the console. That's all we're going to do here. So let's zoom out on this. Let's go ahead and click on this album here, and you can see that I get back the entire JSON object for the album. So that's this over here. Remember I said there was a lot more information in the album, besides, man, it's so much nicer, right? It's like 1,000 degrees with that light on. That sucker is hot. But right here you can see we have the wrapper type, the collection type, the artist ID. I mean, there's just a ton of data that we can get at. And I find this to be amazing because in most JavaScript frameworks, you have to fight for this information or you have to wire all this up yourself. But in Vue, it kind of just works. And to me, that's intuitive. I would expect this to work like this. I wouldn't have to expect to do any additional legwork. All right, so that's looping. Let's talk about components, because I think that we need to be honest and say that we can't build applications like we did before in terms of building large applications. We need some sort of component model to do that. And the frameworks that we have today, like Angular, like React, are very componentized in nature. So no matter what you're doing, if you're working with one of those, you're probably creating components and then reusing those. This is the idea of like creating your own HTML tags. So in the case of our album demo here, where we were looping over before, let's open this up in CodePen. Let me close my extraneous tabs. This always freaks me out. Do you want to stay or you want to leave? I'm like, well, I wanted to leave, but I don't know if I do anymore. Jeez, man. Let's close this. All right, back to our one demo here. So let's come down here and look at this. Right here, I've specified a Vue component. I'm going to zoom in on that. And then I've given it a name. And then inside of that whole template, that chunk of markup that we had before that we were looping over, it now resides inside the template for this album. So this is all we need to do to create a component here. That's all I've done. And then the one additional item that I've added is I've added something called props here at the bottom. Now, if you've done React before, this is probably the first moment where you're like, I know what that is. So React people are going to be very comfortable with props. If you're not familiar with props, props are just a way of passing down information to an element, like an event handler or some piece of data, on an attribute. That's it. That's all it is. And so basically what I'm saying here is this album component has this markup, and it receives this piece of data from its parent. So we're going to pass that album in on the component itself. And then down here, here's our Vue component that we were working with, where we specify the element, the app, we specify the albums array, and then we can actually use this component now. So we don't have to do anything else to use this component. If we were to come up here at the top, you can now see that instead of the looping syntax that we had before, we've reduced this quite a bit, and now we have just album. We're looping over each album, and we're specifying the props here. Remember I said we're going to pass an album down? That's this props right here, this :album equals album. That's the prop. And then you'll notice this right here is something that we didn't do earlier, is that I've added a key now. React people will be familiar with this as well. Vue, just like React, has a virtual DOM. Now, this has been sort of an overblown selling feature, I think, in the past, but the idea is that React and Vue both use this concept of keeping track of changes that are being made in memory and then computing the logical shortest path to make those changes. So, for instance, if you had a list of 4 items and you changed the text of the 4th item, one way to update the screen would be to just wipe out the whole list and then recreate the whole list. Or even wipe out the 4th item and then recreate the 4th item. But you don't actually need to do any of that stuff. All you really need to do is change the text. And anytime we update the DOM, these are slow operations. So we don't want to do this as infrequently as we possibly can. And so what Vue and React do is they sort of give you this confidence that the algorithm that they're going to use to make that update is going to be extremely efficient. Now, in order to do that, they have to know which item represents which item. And what I mean by that is in this collection here, they need to know if I'm associating this key with this item. So if this object with this key changes, only this item is changed. It's not a new item, it's just an update, right? So I don't have to recreate the whole item, I just need to change the text. And so we're adding a key here on the looping collection as well. So that's very important. React people will be very familiar with this. I don't believe Angular, does Angular have something similar to this, like a key for every item that you loop over? Does anybody know? My Angular people? Yes, no? Nobody knows? All right. I don't think it does. I'm thinking through it. TJ's shaking his head. No. I wonder how it keeps track of items then. Does Angular have a virtual DOM? Angular 2 has a virtual DOM? We don't say Angular 2 anymore though, right? Do we say Angular now? It's just Angular. I think they're on version 5 too now, Angular 5. Oh, we've come so far. All right, so that is components inside of Vue. Very simple to do, right? We didn't really have to do anything besides say Vue.component, give it a name, specify the template. All right, cool, we're moving right along here. So hopefully at this point, you think, Vue is simple. Hopefully I've convinced you of at least that much, or maybe my demos were not great enough. I don't know, maybe you're very difficult to impress. But if so, let's move on and see if we can't get you with the next one here. Powerful. I want to talk about powerful. We did talk about this idea of simplicity. And that when something is simplicity, you sort of make a trade-off in terms of flexibility. Right? And so what we tend to do as software engineers is we try to design systems that can handle anything. And when systems are very flexible, they're also extremely complex, usually. And what we were really trying to do is make something that's very flexible, but also very simple, right? And that's sort of that's what we're all striving for all the time. That would be sort of the perfect system if we could create and be perfect developers. So let's talk about Vue and how powerful it is. Back in 2013, I gave this talk at FluentConf about Angular directives, and that was when AngularJS had first come out. And the title of the presentation was Angular and the Computer Science of JavaScript, and it was really a dig at Angular because I felt like it was overly complex, right? It had terminology in it like transclusion, there was pre and post linking. I mean, building directives in Angular was extremely difficult because of the cognitive overhead that you had to carry with you in order to do that. So very powerful, but very hard to use. Angular had this learning curve where you would watch the demos, and Vue's kind of the same way. It demos very, very well, but the difference between Vue and Angular is that Angular immediately got complex, right? Because then you're like, oh, I need a directive. Now I need a degree in computer science in order to do that, right? Whereas Vue's like, as you're going to see here, you can create the same functionality in Vue, but you don't need to have all this peripheral knowledge. Super powerful, a bit on the complex side of extremely difficult, but they were a good idea. So I want to take a look at directives inside of Vue, because Vue has directives. And again, if you're an Angular person, this is going to give you a warm and fuzzy feeling. So in this example, what we're going to do here, and what I did in the original article that I wrote for Adobe Developer Connection, God rest its soul, is create the blink tag, because they took away the blink tag, and I'm not much of a designer, so I need the blink tag, and so I wanted to bring the blink tag back. So what we're basically going to do is create a directive that allows us to create a blink tag. And this is the same thing that I did in Angular many, many years ago, and we're going to see the difference here. So to create a directive in Vue, this is it. This is all you have to do. Now, it doesn't do anything, right? But that's it. That's all the ceremony that's involved with you creating a new directive here. So let's take a look at what it actually looks like to create a directive that makes this thing blink. Go over to CodePen here again. And let's zoom in a little bit. All right, so here's our directive. We called it blink. And then Vue has something called hook functions. And these hook functions basically let you tie into the lifecycle of the directive. And the one that is most commonly used is something called bind. And bind basically says when this directive is actually bound to the element, then what code do you want to execute? The great thing about directives is that in a directive, you automatically get a reference to the raw HTML component that you're working with. By default, Vue obscures the raw HTML away from you because it doesn't want you working with raw elements. Because if you jump in and intercept the updating of the DOM, then Vue can't really do its job with the virtual DOM, right? Because now you've stuck yourself in between the virtual DOM and the process of updating it and injected a lot of human error there. And so in this example, the element is what you get. So in our case, it's a div, and then I'm just applying a little bit of CSS to make it blink. That's it. I wrote this same component in AngularJS that many years ago, and it took this much code and an entire article to explain how to do that. To me, this is what web development should be like, right? This is why we love it. It's because it's very simple to do things on the web like create and bring the blink tag back. People miss the blink tag. This is not a good session for which to get user interface or user experience advice. Don't listen to anything I say in that regard. Okay. So this is basically a very simple directive. We talked about hook functions. These are directives inside of Vue. So we've looked at components and we've looked at directives. And one of the first things that was sort of confusing to me was, well, when do I use a component and when do I use a directive? Because there's both. And as it was explained to me, that we use components most of the time. These are the building blocks of any application. And if we want access, low-level DOM access like we just had, because we just altered the style of something inline like that, then we would need directives to do that, right? So directives are sort of attributes. Components are actual elements themselves. Directives and components, directives and components. All right, we need to talk about the CLI. It's important to note that while it's really cool that you can drop a tag into a page and just start coding, that's not how we build applications, right? Let's just be honest here. And so in order to do that, eventually at some point you are going to need things like Webpack, you are going to need a bundler, you're going to need a minification tool, you're going to need all of these things. And Vue has all of that stuff, right? They don't expect you to drop a tag, even though you can. They don't expect you to build actual applications that way. It's really only good for demos. Before we do the Vue CLI, because I'm going to close out with that, we're going to do a good song and dance on the CLIs. I'm just checking my time here. How long do I have? 2 hours? Is it 2 hours? I think 3 hours. Good. All right. So we'll spend a lot of time on the CLI. All right. So I do want to talk, first, about the popularity of Vue, and then we'll end with the CLI, because that's a really sort of very impressive tool. Now, again, I think that when we say something is popular, we all sort of have this human reaction to this idea of things being popular, and we're like, well, I don't like things that are popular because I have these tight pants on and this scarf, and my name is Brandon, and I only drink fancy coffee, and I listen to Radiohead, so I'm not going to use your thing because it's popular. Well, I have news for you. Everybody's wearing scarves, everyone's going to Starbucks, and everybody listens to Radiohead, so you already are using things that are popular. I do understand this notion of not wanting to use something just because it's popular. Like, that's not a good reason to make a technical decision. Well, everyone else is doing it. Like, everybody else did Java. We should do Java too, right? Like, we can now look back and say, that maybe wasn't the best idea, right? We should have evaluated that a little bit further. But it isn't to say that it's not without merit. Popularity, when it comes to technology, is important because popular equals ecosystem. That's straight up. I mean, if you use something, it could be the best framework in the world. If nobody else is using it, you're going to be writing all the blog posts. You're going to be asking and answering your own Stack Overflow questions. You're going to be writing all the components. You're going to be writing all the open source projects, right? You're going to be the only one in the Slack channel, and that's just no good, right? We're not going to get much done that way. So what I want to do is give you some anecdotal measures of Vue. Now, what I'm not doing here is I'm going to show you numbers and say that this is gospel. It's really hard to measure the popularity of something. So just keep in mind, these are just data points. These are not facts. This is not fake news. Just take it with a grain of salt. I want to look at some anecdotal numbers for this. The first thing that I did was I went out to GitHub, and I was like, well, what does GitHub say about the popularity of something? So first I looked at React. This is several weeks old, maybe even over a month old at the time. React was sitting at right about 75,000 stars, 76,000 stars, that's crazy. And then I looked at Angular, and Angular is sitting at about 27,000 stars. Now, in the case of Angular, there's different repos. So you would really have to add up all of Angular's repos to get an accurate number here. That's probably not an accurate measurement. But what I do want to show you is that, so we got 75,000, 27,000, and Vue is at 67,000 stars. That's crazy. So to say, what I want you to understand here is that Vue is extremely popular by any sort of developer definition here on GitHub if we were just looking at how much people had started the repo. Right, so this thing is frequently on the trending page. This is not a flash in the pan. This is legit. People are using this. A lot of people are using it. Again, these are not facts. They're just data points. Do with it what you will. Let's look at some more anecdotal numbers here. Best of JS tries to rank things by popularity here. So you can see that we have React at the top, and then right next to that we have Vue. So Best of JS is actually ranking Vue right next to React. Below that, we have Angular 1 and Angular 2. What I love here, what was really surprising is Backbone is still up there. That makes me happy. And then what was kind of weird to me was Polymers up here. Is anybody using Polymer web components? Yeah, that's right here, one person right here. A couple of people, but not a lot of us are using web components. So I thought that was kind of strange. Not that we don't want to use web components, it's just not something that I see a lot of people doing. But apparently Best of JS says that they are. So I don't know, maybe that negates this whole argument right here. I missed you, Backbone. Okay, I want to talk about some different things that you can use because of the ecosystem and the popularity of Vue. You have a few more options. One of them is called Beautify. So if you like material design, everybody likes material design. If you want to make a beautiful app, it has to be material design. It's 2017, right? That's the only way to make a good-looking app. And so you're going to want that material design. You can go to Beautify.com to get that material design. I also want to point out something else here, which is that it's very amateur to take a screenshot with your cursor in it, so don't do that, just as a little tip there. So Beautify.js, check that out. That looks pretty cool. I haven't used it, but you should. Let's talk about Kendo UI. That's another UI framework that also has Vue support. This includes widgets, things like grids, tree lists, pivot grids, Gantt charts, right? Like, you don't want to build a Gantt chart. If somebody comes up to you and says, hey, we need a Gantt chart in this application, that's not something you're going to build on your own, right? If that was something that you would have to do, you're probably going to quit your job and find another job, or maybe just go back to school and switch careers altogether, because you're not going to build a Gantt chart. So Kendo UI has already built a Gantt chart, so you can just buy one from them, slap it in there, and then you look really, really smart, because nobody knows that you didn't actually write the component, because that's not really any of their business, is it, right? You keep that between you and me. So you can go check out Kendo UI. They also have React components and Angular components as well for all of your UI needs. Additionally, there's this thing called the Quasar Framework. I don't know what this is. I was on Google and I found it. Here's what it says. Build responsive websites, PWAs, hybrid mobile apps that look native, and Electron apps all simultaneously using the same code base powered with Vue. There's a lot of buzzwords in that paragraph. And again, I'm not entirely sure what the Quasar Framework does, but it sounds really amazing. So you should go check it out and let me know if it actually is a thing or even works. I don't even know if this link works, but there it is right there. And then I would also like to point out that NativeScript also supports Vue. So if you're looking to build native mobile apps, you can use that using NativeScript. I think that it's important to sort of sidebar here and say that there is no wrong way to build a mobile app. If you want to build a progressive web app because that works for you, then build a progressive web app. If you want to build a native app because that works for you, then build a native app. Do what works for you. That's the only right way to do things, is the way that works for you and your project. So check out NativeScript. I wasn't paid to say that. Any extra? Maybe I can get a free beer. If I say it again, can I get 2 free beers? All right. So it's simple, powerful, popular, and now we're at that point in the presentation where we're going to look at the CLI. So let's do that. I'm going to pull up the terminal here so you know that I'm smart. All right. Is that good enough? Can we see that in the back? Just tell me when to stop. Anybody? I'll just keep going? Okay. Let's get this out of here. So what directory am I in? Oh my goodness, I don't even know where I am. Let's go back to dev. That's not an option. Let's go here. Cool. Let's move into this directory. And actually, I didn't even have to type cd. I just learned this. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the Vue CLI to create a new project. So what I'm going to do is type Vue. And just to preface this, I always assume people know this, but you would npm install Vue CLI, right? And then pass global, and then it will fail, and then you'll do it again, and it will ask you, and you'll put sudo in, right? And it'll ask you for your password, and you'll put that in wrong. But eventually, you'll get the CLI installed, and once you do that, you can create a new project. So you can say Vue init, and then Vue takes in some templates. So it has this idea of templates. So if I just did Vue init, it would basically give me an empty Vue project, but I want a little bit more than that, because I want to show you the build tools. And so we're going to use the Webpack simple template. There's also a Webpack template, which includes routing, so you can use that as well. A little more complex. So let's do Vue init, Webpack, simple, and then we can call it whatever we like here. Whatever we like. I can't spell. Does this work? Yes. All right, so it's downloading the template, creating the project name, and whenever I run through templates like this, I just take all the defaults, kind of like npm init. I don't care about any of this. Nobody cares that I'm the author or what the license is. Definitely want to use Sass. Anybody in here using less? Couple people? I'm still mad about it too. Less should have won. Less should have won. You know, you remember when Taylor Swift won the award for the best video, and then Kanye West got on the stage and took the mic and said, I'm going to let you finish, but Beyonce should have won, and she should have won. This is me taking the mic and saying, less should have won, but it didn't. Now we all have to use Sass. Thanks a lot, Bootstrap. So we're going to use Sass, even though we don't really want to, and then we're going to move into this directory and Good thing I have code completion. I'm not going to be able to type that. And then we're going to run an npm install. And fortunately for us, npm is a lot faster than it used to be. It used to be you'd run npm install, and then you call your mom, and you go get a sandwich, you take a nap, you watch a show, you come back, it's still running, or maybe it failed and you get to do it all over again. I remember those days. But it is a lot faster now, so hopefully this will finish here shortly. There we go. And now we can fire up our Vue app by saying npm, let's say Vue. Let's see, what was the command here? I've already forgotten it. Run dev, there we go. Vue run dev. That's right, thank you. This person here knows what's going on. In the know. There we go, so our app is up and running, looks fantastic. All right, so let's go ahead and open up the greatest code editor in the world, VS Code. I don't think that's up for debate. Who's using VS Code in here? Yes, all of my people. Who's using Sublime? Anybody using Sublime? It's okay, you can come over. We'll have you, we'll take you too. Anybody using WebStorm? All right, yeah, WebStorm, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. Not as good as VS Code, but still good stuff. Anybody using Vim? Where are my Vim people? Right back there. You know how to know a Vim user, right? Don't worry, they'll tell you. That's right, those are my Vim people. Very proud of their Vimming. All right, so let's take a look at our application here. I'm just gonna make this full screen. We'll take the font size up a little bit. How much time do I have left? All right, 2 hours and 40 minutes. Cool. All right, so inside of this application here, we have an entry point, which is our main file. Hopefully you can see this. By the way, my setup here, if you're interested in why my IDE looks so good, it's because the theme that I use is called Hoplite, and then the icon theme over here is called Material Icons. Some people have told me that a white screen is not good for your eyes because science. But I'm not going to let science stand in the way of the perfect theme and the perfect editor. So I don't need that in my life. I don't need any more facts. OK, so we have our entry point here, and we're basically loading up. This should look familiar after all the demos we looked at. And now we've got this additional render function where we're passing in this app component. So just know that this is the entry point, and the first thing that it's going to load up is this app.vue here. And this is all the markup that we saw on that page. Now, what's interesting about Vue components is, first of all, they have app.vue. So .vue is a file type, right? So similar to .jsx, if you do React, these are Vue components. Inside of that, we have a template at the top. You see this template tag. All the markup goes in there. And then down here, we have a script tag, right? So your JavaScript goes here, and then your style goes down here at the bottom. So this is how we build components in Vue, and all the files look the same. Template, script, style. So let's come here, and if we were to make a change here, I don't know, let's change essential links. We can just say, add some of this right here. And then, of course, if we go back, then it updates. You can see right there. So you have what essentially is Webpack running in the background, bundling and doing hot reloading. If we look at the network requests from this thing, you can see that we have a build right here, and then all of our code is inside of this thing, complete with source maps and all the crap that you don't understand and don't want to have to worry about. I don't blame you. I don't want to have to worry about that stuff either. In fact, somebody had said that the new technical interview is to stick someone in a room and see if they can configure Webpack without the internet. Everyone's going to fail that test. Nobody can do that, right? And so we have all these CLI tools that now take care of this stuff for us, which is really, really nice. So let's take a look at, see how much further we can get in creating sort of our albums application from earlier using Vue. So what I want to do is create a new component here. So I'm going to create a folder called Components. Inside of that, I'm going to put a new album component. So inside of that album component, let me come up to my snippets here. Let's see here. And in fact, I should point out as well that there's a nice snippets. We search for Vue here. Vue snippets, Vue VS Code snippets. Sarah made this, and they are fantastic. And we can use vbase here to create a simple component. So if we just do vbase, there we go. So now we have an album component. And in fact, we don't really have to do anything else at this point. This component will actually work. Now, it won't do anything, but it does actually work. And so what we would do now is come in here and put in some markup. So let's put our markup in here. Let me come back and use my snippets. Let's see, album template. There we go. So now we have our markup. And then we need to put in our script here. So I'm going to take this out. Let's put in our script, which would be Vue album script. And it looks a little bit different. And now we're exporting the default. We don't need to give it a name, but we're saying that it has a name of album, so we're not naming the export, but inside we're giving it a name. And then there's that props again. Remember you passing props before? Props now lives here. And we're not styling anything, so we're not going to use any style. And then let's come over to this app here, and let's pull out this right here. And let's go ahead and add in some new markup. Actually, let's take out this code here. Let's take everything out of this file. Let's remove all the CSS down at the bottom. Boom, all that's gone. And then we can put in some additional script here. Back to my snippets. Let's do album, import album, app component. There we go. So this is, again, this is all the same code that we had before, but there's a few variations here that I want to point out. One of them is that data before was an object. Now it's a method, because we're using a Vue component, so we have to have a method. And then we still have the created method. We're still doing a fetch JSONP. And if we wanted to use that album component, what we would do is come over and say import album. No, stop VS Code. I don't need that much help. Album from, and of course VS Code is smart, so it knows that we have a components folder. And inside of that, we have an album.vue file. There we go. And then we can include this by saying components album. Yeah, that's all we have to do. So now we've included the album component inside of our app component here, and we can use it. And if you remember, up at the top, we would do like this. We would say, I don't know, we had a section. It was called section, something like that. And then inside of that thing, we would have an album, and we would say v4 album in albums. And then it's going to tell us that we need a key. So we'll just say album.collection ID, and it's going to tell us that we want to pass the album prop, if you remember that. So we'll just say album, and that equals album. All right, and just like this, we have recreated the same application that we had before, but now we're split up into different components here. We're right up on time. I have to do a few more things, so we're going to kind of stop it here conceptually. But you can see that you can start building out your application this way to where you have components, and then you have your main app, and then you have components, and this is what a real application might look like in an actual workflow. I did promise you that I was going to leave you with some good learning resources, and I'm going to do that. So let's do this. Corey House once said this. I think this is sort of obvious, but well said, worth repeating. You go to conferences to learn what you need to learn. So hopefully in this session you've learned that you should learn Vue. You should learn Vue. I mean, really, it doesn't take that long to do, and it's just one more thing that you'll know and you can stick on your resume and impress your friends with. I know Vue, you don't. I'm much better than you are. So you need to learn Vue. How are you going to do that? I'm going to give you that answer in the next slide. You're going to go to vuecasts.com. This is the only takeaway from this presentation that you need is this URL. This is Jeffrey Way. He runs laracast.com. He did an entire series on Vue 2. It is free, and it will teach you everything about Vue, and it will go to in-depth in Vue. So if you've got 2 hours to spend watching free videos from a fantastic presenter, you can learn Vue and be awesome. So thank you, Jeffrey, for doing that. I really do appreciate that. That's really good stuff. You should check that out. All right, with that, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming. If you want to view these slides again and all these examples, slides.com/BURKE/Vue. Remember, follow me on Twitter. I am obsessed with fake points, and most of my personal value is wrapped up in whether or not you'll follow me on Twitter, so I'd appreciate it if you would do that so I could feel better about myself. Thank you so much for coming.